A Musical Life with film, TV, and video game composer Pieter Schlosser. Pieter Schlosser is an award-winning film, television, and video game composer known for his work on NBC's hit show You, Me, and the Apocalypse, as well as his collaborations with Steve Jablonsky on Desperate Housewives, the Transformers film, and Gears of War 2 and 3 video games. As a multicultural multi-instrumentalist, Pieter draws on an incredible reservoir of creativity and artistic versatility. Welcome to A Musical Life. I'm Hugh Sung. You know, I really love these shows where we get to talk to amazing composers and explore the creative process and inspirations behind their work. Pieter Schlosser is one of those musicians that needs the prefix multi in front of their name. Multilinguist, multi-genre, multi-talented, and a great suffix for him would probably be go-getter. Time and time again, Pieter's initiative has served him well, putting him in the company of great film composers like Hans Zimmer and opening some incredible opportunities in film, TV, and video games. Let's start by listening to one of his tracks called Parsifal and Artemis. Pieter, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, we've just heard one of your beautiful compositions, Parsifal and Artemis, which was written, as I understand it, as an electric cello demo for a really interesting company in San Francisco that makes virtual instruments. Can you tell us a little bit about this company?
They were a company originally called Tonehammer. It started out as a sample developer, and then they went off on, there were two guys, they went off on their own, and ADO became, sort of the offshoot of that. And I knew them because I was a huge fan of their the tone hammer stuff, and one night one of my hard drive exploded.
Oh
Not
no.
literally, but it it went up in flames, and this was, in the middle of a deadline for Desperate Housewives when I was working on that with Steve Jablonsky. And I emailed them that night at around 3 in the morning. I said, hey guys, I've lost all my samples. And about 20 minutes later, they sent me all the stuff I had lost without any hesitation. And they said, here it is. So
Wow.
since that moment, I became really friendly with them, and eventually they asked me if I wanted to start doing demos for their products. Trolls is the head guy there at 8DO, and he's kind of a mad genius and has all these really terrific ideas. And I've been doing demos for them ever since. And this is one of the instruments that they came out with not that long ago.
So incredible. I have to make sure we include a link to 8DO in the show notes so that other folks can take advantage of this amazing company. And, it goes without saying, companies that provide this level of excellent customer service, that's a win in everybody's book, right?
Absolutely. And you can kind of tell that they they love what they do when they're, up at 2 in the morning doing what I'm doing, messing with files, and they go, yeah, here's your files. I know you need them right away. So there you go.
So if you don't mind, for those who are not familiar with what we're talking about, virtual instruments, samples, what are these things? I mean, so to help us understand for the non-musician, non-composer, what are we talking about here?
The simplest way to explain it is essentially what happens is you grab a real instrument, for example, a piano, and that you record every single note at different, hitting the keys at different strengths, essentially, which in tech terms is called velocity. Mm-hmm. And you record these samples, and then what you do is once you record thousands of these sounds, you then lay them out so that you can have these living in your computer. And so as a non-piano player, well, the piano was a bad example, but as a non-cello player, I can now quote unquote play a cello on my computer using an actual a MIDI keyboard, an electronic keyboard, and using a sequencer.
That's incredible, because you had me fooled. I thought I had pretty good ears, but I actually thought these were live musicians playing. I mean, it sounded electronified, but I thought they were actually playing. And the fact is, you're just playing a keyboard, and those keys are triggering these recorded sounds, and you just connect them all together to make this amazing performance, right?
Exactly, and that's sort of where the art is, and I can't take all the credit. Of course, the sample developer has a lot to do with how these instruments are played, and I don't like to call them samples. I like to call them instruments, because they actually all have their quirks and idiosyncrasies, and you have to learn how to manipulate them in a way that will make them sound real. And as real as they sound, they will never replace actual breathing players. So if I were to record actual players on this piece, you would, it would elevate it certainly to the next level, and you would go, oh, I hear the difference now.
So what are the advantages of working with virtual instruments over live musicians? As you said, when we were working with live musicians, you can hear a huge difference in quality, but what are the advantages of working with virtual instruments?
You have there's the practical side of it, which is the time and the budget. So if you don't have the budget to record a 60-piece orchestra, if you're able to manipulate these samples properly and you know how to do that, you can do that in a very convincing way. And nowadays, a lot of times, people talk about doing mock-ups and demos for producers, for them to approve and listen to and comment on. And the fact is that the demo isn't really the demo anymore. The demo becomes the final product a lot of times, because there isn't much time and because there isn't really a budget to record. An orchestra, especially for television, the turnaround time is so quick that you have to really get it done in a really short amount of time. So there isn't much time to orchestrate and to get this onto paper, to go to a studio, get 60 musicians in there and record it. And so there's a lot of time constraints and budgetary constraints that where the samples come in, that you can take advantage of that.
we'll touch on this sample versus live musician issue a little bit later. But getting back to this track, now this wasn't entirely just virtual instruments. I understand that a very lovely voice made a special contribution to this track. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, and I'm glad that you said it was lovely because I am completely biased as the father of this voice. So I was writing this piece, which was inspired by a book called Ready Player One, which is actually going to be made into a film in about a year and a half, 2 years, directed by Steven Spielberg. And
wow.
Scored by none other than John Williams.
Cool.
And so I wrote this piece with that book in mind. And I had gotten to a point in the demo where I didn't, it needed something else. I didn't know, it was almost complete, but it needed something else. I wasn't sure what it was. And I started humming the melody that I had written for the cello. So I went out into the living room and I saw my daughter watching Netflix or something on the iPad. And I said, "Hey, what are you doing? Do you want to sing for me?" She's been taking voice lessons. So I said, "Hey, do you want to record something?" She said, "No, not really." She got a little shy about it. I said, "Okay, well, if you change your mind, let me know." So I came back into the studio, and about 20 minutes later, she comes in, opens the door, closes the door, puts on headphones, gets in front of the mic, and says, "Okay, let's do this."
Well, please send along my kudos to your daughter because I thought it was a professional singer. I mean, really, she had beautiful vibrato, and it blended perfectly with the cello line. It was so gorgeous.
Thank you. I will let her know. It was really gratifying as a father and as a musician, and for her to go after the process, for her to say to me, "That was a lot more fun than I expected." That was one of those moments that is gonna be ingrained in my brain as a father and as a composer for a long time.
Would you mind sharing how old was she at the time when you made that recording?
This was about maybe 2 months ago. She's 9, and she'll be 10 in October.
She's only 9, and she sounds like that? Oh my goodness! Okay, well, I think we have a professional singer on our hands.
I hope so. I hope so.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, I understand that you were born. You've got a fascinating backstory. You were born in Guatemala. And you spent your childhood living in several Central American countries. You actually lived in Austria, but you also lived in Panama, and then you moved to Costa Rica when you were 15. First of all, with all of this traveling around, what is your actual ethnic origin, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm I guess not unlike many people where there's a bunch of me from a bunch of different places. So my one half of me is very simple. That's the Dutch half. That's my mother.
Okay.
She was born in Holland from Dutch parents, and I think they go back a while in Holland. On my father's side, he was born in Costa Rica. Moved to Guatemala when he was very young, but his father was half Guatemalan, half German, and my grandmother was American.
Wow, that's incredible. So I guess my question is, what was the reason for moving around to so many countries?
My father used to work for DHL, which is a shipping company. It's like FedEx or UPS.
Sure.
And they moved him around. So we were in Guatemala at first until I was about 8 years old. Then we moved to Austria. After Austria, we went to Panama. After Panama, we went to Costa Rica. And then after I finished high school in Costa Rica, I went to Boston for college.
So during all of these travels, you picked up a number of languages, obviously. What languages do you speak now?
I speak English, Spanish, German, and Dutch. If I spend a little bit more time in Holland, I would pick up the Dutch more easily, but there was an episode of The Simpsons, I don't know if you saw this, where he was an quote unquote exchange student in France, where he wasn't really an exchange student. He was a slave laborer in a farm, and there comes a point, and this is not where the similarities start. The similarity is when there's a point where he starts complaining about it. And he's been in France long enough that all of a sudden he realizes that he's complaining in French. And that happened to me when I went to Holland at one point, where I just all of a sudden started speaking Dutch. It had always been in the back of my brain. My mother always spoke to us in Dutch. We never really responded. And so it was always stored somewhere in there. And when I went to Holland, when I was, in my late teens, all of a sudden it just kind of came out, and I went, "Oh, there it is."
Was it disconcerting as a young person moving to so many different environments? I know for some people it can be unsettling to move around so much, and you have friends that you miss. You have a difficult time getting a sense of where home actually is. Was that difficult for you, or did you enjoy the adventure of going to all these different countries?
If I could have lived in more countries, I would have loved that. I mean, for me, it was really amazing. I got to know so many different people. It was hard to leave family initially, and you made friends, and as soon as you had made friends, you would leave on to the next thing. But you made more friends, and I'm actually still in touch with people that I knew from Austria when I was 10, 11 years old. Through the magic of the internet, we've gotten back in touch.
Wow.
So, it exposed me to so many things, and it opens your brain really exponentially to everything, to food, to music, to architecture, to art, to all these different things that you don't necessarily realize that as a kid, but then as an adult, you go, oh my God, that really opened up my brain in ways that I hadn't expected.
And of course, for a composer looking for creative ideas, this must be such a treasure trove of inspiration to be able to draw from all of your experiences. Just to touch on that, I'd like to play another track called, in English, The Road Less Traveled. And this is performed by Advertise, which is a Costa Rican music group. So let's listen to this first. What a fantastic track. And again, I think this highlights your multicultural exposure. Can you tell us about Advertise and your work with them?
I started working with them a while ago. I was still in high school. The music community in Costa Rica is very small, and I met them just because they were musicians. I'd go to their shows and whatnot. And at one point, they were recording a new album, and I said to them, "Hey, look, I'm writing this piece. Do you guys want to hear it?" And this piece, talk about the mishmash of different things. It was inspired. This is one of the first pieces that I wrote when I had first gotten into using computers for writing music, and it was partly inspired by a track by Pat Metheny that my brother used to just love, and he would listen to it over and over. And I think it was called Minuano, and it had a shaker that went throughout the entire song. So I started with shaker, and it sort of built from there. So anyways, I went to them. I said, "Hey, I have this piece. Do you want to check it out?" And they pretty much immediately said yes. With, to my surprise, I said, "Well, I guess it's good enough for you guys to check it out and record." And so they changed the arrangement slightly, and then I was able to be part of the recording and produce a little bit of the session. And that was sort of my first introduction into recording and being in the studio and producing. And I went, okay, this is kind of what I want to do for a while now, is writing and producing music. And so they recorded this album, and the year after that, the next album they did with a Panamanian salsa singer, Ruben Blades, or Ruben Blades, and he's pretty well known, and that album awarded them they won a Latin Grammy for best album that year.
Wow.
So that was pretty terrific, and but however many years later, this was a year and a half ago. They said, "Hey, we're doing an orchestral version of that album that we did with the band and the Costa Rica National Orchestra. Do you want to do an arrangement for us?"
Wow.
And of course, I immediately said, absolutely yes. And so I did an entire arrangement for orchestra and the band, and that was pretty magical. And that was performed last year. Now there were 2 shows, and I think they're going to release an album of that later this year.
Oh, fantastic. Congratulations on that. And it's just remarkable, too. You were just a teenager, and to have the courage to just, your very first composition, to go up to this band and to show it to them. What gave you the courage to do that?
I think ignorance definitely played a big part in that. I was graduating high school, and I figured that I was going to graduate no matter what. And when I started getting interested in music, my grades started, in high school at least, my grades started to kind of dip a little bit. And I had a math teacher who at one point told my mother, "It's okay, his grades are not great, but he's into music. He's going to do fine. He will graduate just fine."
How about
And
it?
so I put all my energy into, rehearsing and going to lessons, and I would spend the entire day at the facilities where they would rehearse, even though I would, in function, I would only be there for an hour for me playing. So I would hang out with these people, and that really gave me an insight as to how things worked within the orchestra. So I would sit with the strings, and I'd go back and sit with the percussion, and I'd go sit with the brass. And so that really gave me a really good perspective of, okay, how do these people sound? How do they breathe? How do they move? How does all this work together?
Incredible. The power of taking initiative and the power of curiosity. So
Yes.
I understand that you're a multi-instrumentalist yourself. You took saxophone lessons when you were in Costa Rica with Javier Valerio. Am I pronouncing his name correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you also played with the Costa Rican Symphony's intermediate and advanced levels. And I actually was looking on your website, and I think I saw you playing an Akai electronic wind controller, or as I mistakenly thought, I thought this was an electronic clarinet, but the official name is the Akai electronic wind controller, which you actually blow in, and you can create MIDI sounds from this electronic wind instruments. It was so cool. Can you tell us what other instruments do you play?
Well, if somebody said, "Well, what do you play?" My answer would be, I play saxophone. If somebody said, "Hey, can you perform? Here's a clarinet or here's a piano. Can you perform?" I would say, "Yeah, I think you should probably find somebody else." So I use these certainly as tools for writing. The iwi is what's great about the iwi, the electronic wind instrument, is that I can use it in a way which allows me to play the way that I would play a woodwind instrument. So the playing is a lot more natural, and I keep that in mind when I'm writing for anything that is wind related, and when I'm writing melodies. And I try to write melodies in a way that I would sing. And this is something I remember from learning how to improvise. Somebody said, "Look, there's a lot of players that will sing, for example, guitar or piano players, as they're improvising, they will be humming or singing as they're playing, which gives them a much more natural flow of how melodies are structured. And the way that you write a melody, or the way that I write a melody, is try to do it in the way that I would speak. So I take breaths, and I do a phrase, and I put 3-4 words together. Then I take a pause, and I breathe, and I continue with the melody. So using the iwi for writing melodies is a lot more natural for me as a woodwind player because of that.
That is so insightful. And I can't tell you how many composers I've run across that have a mechanical understanding of writing, and they'll write melodies that sound okay on the piano, but you couldn't sing them to save your life.
That is true, and that's also where as a saxophone player, especially a tenor, the tenor saxophone is a lot more in line with the male voice. So that helps me to translate that into melodies that you can sing, and that are certain length, that you can breathe, that are a certain range, so that they're not completely unsingable. And that was part of how I wrote the melody for Artemis and Parzival.
Not only that, but I think now that we're getting this deeper insight into your creative processes and tools, now I'm starting to, as I'm reflecting on the tracks that I've heard of your music, now I can pinpoint a little bit more. Why do your melodies sound so good? Your melodies are so memorable and so hummable, and I think you've just helped us to unlock a little bit of the secret of that. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you. It's funny. There's always a little bit of a twinge of doubt where I go, I have no idea if this is any good, but that's where the deadlines come in, and I go, well, this is where I can take it with the time that I have and the resources that I have, and I am satisfied to a certain point. And that's what's the beauty of deadlines is that it only allows you to doubt yourself for that amount of time, because it has to go out into the world after that.
That's right. Absolutely. The beauty of deadlines, the pain of deadlines, the composer's bane, as I've heard so many times.
I enjoy deadlines. I have to tell you, I am very much a fan of them, especially as creative people. If you didn't have a deadline, you would be working and reworking something forever.
Yeah. There's something to the paralysis of perfection, I think they call it, right?
Yes, exactly.
So getting back to your upbringing, you majored in film scoring and music production and engineering at the Berkeley College of Music in Boston. I've heard this school so many times from so many other folks that I've interviewed. Very popular school for a lot of film and TV composers. What was it about Berkeley that helped you to prepare for your career composing for film, TV, and video games?
What's interesting about Berkeley is just the exposure that you have to so many facets of music. When I got there, I think maybe it was just before I got there that I didn't realize that you could do so many different things. You could do music therapy, music business, you could do arranging, you could do music composition, production, and all those things. And truthfully, what helped me the most at Berkeley was, as far as the studies go, was doing music production and engineering. When I first came to LA, what you do is usually there's many ways to start in this career, but as a composer, you start working for other composers, and you are usually their tech person. So they say, well, this isn't working. Can you install some software? I can't hear the speaker, or the And so the tech side of it plays a huge role in that. And so when I came here, that gave me a leg up, I feel like, because I had this tech background and I enjoy it, to start working for somebody.
We're going to dive into that right now. So after you finished your studies at Berkeley, this is exactly what you did. I understand you started out as a runner for the record plant. First, what exactly is the record plant?
I did. So the record plant is a big recording studio, mostly for records. That's in Hollywood. So you name the record, I'm sure there's something that's been done that was recorded there. So I started out, as a studio runner, which means you got to take out the trash, you got to make coffee, you got to get people their lunch orders, and you got to make sure that you do this all with a smile on your face. And it was actually it's an interesting step that doesn't really seem to follow into what you want to do, in terms of, it's like, well, I went to college and I'm bringing people lunch. Well, yes, but this guy ordered his burger without tomatoes. Did you make sure that there weren't any tomatoes in his burger? And I know it sounds silly, but it's those little things where when you listen and you make sure that you get people what it is that they want. Ultimately, that's what I'm doing as a composer. I'm getting people what they want. If they say no tomatoes, I gotta not put tomatoes in my music. It's the same thing with the burger or their coffee or whatever that might be.
Yeah.
And so when I was working at the record plant, they were recording the score for The Italian Job, which was a John Powell film. So the newer Italian Job, because there's the classic one.
Yeah.
So I started asking, interacting with the engineer, Alan Meyerson. And I at the time, I didn't realize who he was. I went home, looked at all my soundtracks, and I went, oh, there's Alan, there's Alan, there's Alan.
Wow.
Anyways, it turns out that Alan has been working with Hans Zimmer for years now.
Wow.
And so then I became aware of John Powell as well. And so I kind of started hounding him a little bit in the nicest possible way. And he gave, so Alan gave me his phone number, and I started assisting him in other sessions. And so through him, and also through one of my professors at Berkeley, I ended up eventually at what at the time was Media Ventures, which is now Remote Control Productions, which is Hans Zimmer's production company and studio. And I started interning there.
Wow. It's so fascinating to hear you recount this. The more composers I interview, the more I find that great careers are really the sum of little jobs that lead to the amazing connections as what you just described. So thank you so much for sharing that. So Hans Zimmer, I'm salivating here. What was it like working with Hans Zimmer, the great film composer that everybody's been he's hot stuff right now. What was it like working with him?
He's been hot stuff for a long time. It was
true.
Beautiful, and it was exhausting, and I learned so much, and I got to meet so many people, and as sort of as a tech geek myself, that is the mecca of where you want to be when it comes to film music and technology. And Hans is one of those mad scientists that has these great ideas and things on the technology side and how to integrate that into music. And he surrounds himself with incredibly smart and bright people. And he goes, hey, can we try this thing? And they go, sure, we'll try it. And then that technology eventually gets down to us common folk, and we get to enjoy that in our studios, a much more reduced version of that, but that's part of the thing of being there, learning how to produce a great sounding score, being surrounded by these amazing composers, because there's a bunch of people there, a bunch of different composers that do a lot of TV and film, and that eventually led me to working with Steve Jablonsky, who was at Steve's studio at the time.
Wow. Well, before we get into Steve Jablonsky, what's Hans like as a person?
I have so much respect for him. He really thinks like a filmmaker more than a composer. He's got complete command of a room. There's a quote by Maya Angelou, I think, that says something like, people won't remember what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel. And Hans has this ability to make everyone, when you get into a meeting with a director, he has this ability to make them feel really comfortable and in control. And he always asks the right questions, and I have this quote of Hans that I feel like he would know how to sell sand to a camel. He knows how to do that really well and very from a very honest place. If something isn't working, he'll tell you, you know what, no, that doesn't work. Let's try something else. And so he's very honest about his approach, and if something is working or not, he will tell you without any hesitation.
So, as you just mentioned, through your work at Hans Zimmer's production studio, you started working for another composer who was working there, Steve Jablonsky, who is the composer for TV shows like Desperate Housewives and other major projects like The Transformers. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Right.
So when I was there, he was he had several credits under his belt at the time, but he was really on a very quick and high upward trajectory. So he started out, when I was there, he was working on an anime called Steam Boy.
Sure, I love that movie. That was great.
Oh,
I love that movie, yeah.
That was amazing. So that was one of my first experiences with him. And then he got this little show called Desperate Housewives. You might have heard of it. And what was funny is, when we first heard it, we were like, what is this Desperate Housewives? It sounds like a reality show. And 8 seasons later, one of the biggest TV shows at the time. Yeah. So that and that's where I started cutting my teeth, was with Desperate Housewives. And he got that show, and then he was working on The Island, and it's pretty soon after that he was working on Transformers. So it was all this stuff coming together, and he was really needing help on the TV side of things, on Desperate Housewives. And I said, look, I'm very happy to help. And so just out of out of necessity and also out of my insistence, I said, "Look, let me help you with this." And eventually, he allowed me to start writing a bunch of cues on his TV show.
How cool. I'm just curious, are most of these sorts of jobs found by these kinds of personal connections? Or do composers sometimes advertise for assistance in other ways? It just seems like there's so much person to person elbow rubbing that makes these incredible opportunities appear or possible.
Yes, I mean the answer is that it is almost always going to be from a personal connection. Yes, they can advertise, but they will advertise through friends, or they will ask a friend, and these guys are so busy that they don't really have time to go out there and look for somebody. They're going to ask their friends, "Hey, I really need somebody. Do you have somebody that you could recommend?" So it's all from recommendations. So that's how you kind of get in there. And then, when somebody says, "Yes, I worked with him on so and so, he would be great," and that's how it works now with anything. With working on TV shows or films. Producers and directors are so busy that they're not going to go to Google and go, film composer, let's see who I can find. It's going to be all based on recommendations.
Sure. So it's really important to build your networking and friendship and service skills, really being able to help other people and be of genuine, honest, sincere help to get other people's work as good as it can, which can then lead to your own opportunities, it sounds like.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So I'd like to shift gears a little bit and spend some time decomposing, or maybe that's not the right word, but deconstructing some of your amazing tracks and going into the creative processes that went through your mind as you put them together. If you don't mind me just even sharing my own impressions of some of these. I love your music. I really enjoy this. Now, you've contributed, as we mentioned, you've contributed to some pretty amazing projects, including the Transformers movie and video game. So let's go ahead and listen to one of your tracks called Pillars. Given the theme of these giant living robots battling together, it makes sense that it seems like you start off with these heavy metallic sounds clashing, and then, if I'm not mistaken, it seems like the strings are portraying the human elements that are woven between the mechanical ones, and they start to converge closer and closer together at the end. I'm wondering if you could tell us how you draw upon any particular themes, projects, thematic elements that come up with the inspiration for your scores.
It's really different from project to project, and for Transformers, obviously Steve was he was the head guy, so I was following his lead on that. But there was certainly an element of humanizing the robots. So it's always an interesting way it's always interesting to try to find what that is. What are those sounds that are going to be quote unquote proprietary to the sound that you're creating for that particular show or that character, or and it can change even throughout the show, which was the case on You, Me, and the Apocalypse, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But it's trying to find the voice of the show that is all, at least for me, dictated by what I'm seeing.
So, as you mentioned, you were also the composer for the Sky One NBC comedy drama You, Me, and the I can't even say it, Apocalypse. So, I'd like to start off by listening to two contrasting tracks that you wrote. And this first one, titled The Rapture, sounds, well, let's listen to it first, and then I want to share what it sounds like to me. So this sounds almost fairy-like, kind of mystical, somewhat sad and wistful. Some of the instrumental sounds seem to evoke a sense of lost childhood, like distant memories of old Christmas toys. Now, I haven't seen the show. Would you mind telling us what scene is this track depicting?
Well, it's really interesting that you say that, because this scene was from episode 3, and so the main character is searching for his real mother. He was adopted, and he goes to where he thinks his mother's living. She is actually not living there anymore, and he finds this model of the town where he was born, which is called Slough. And in this, so it's there are miniature trees and miniature houses, and his story is that his mother drops him off at a church, at a parking lot for a church, so that she needs to leave him there because there's a whole slew of things that happen in the show, but that I won't get into because I don't want to spoil it. But you when you talked about the nostalgia and the childhood thing, that's part of what is his discovery of it. So he finds this model and he starts looking at it, and so we see the camera sort of panning over this model town with the little trees, and we find ultimately we end up on a shot of the tiny little box where he was swaddled in blankets as a baby in front of the church. So it's actually very much that, where it's like, oh, I was abandoned and left as a kid, and so I didn't really have a quote unquote normal childhood because I did grow up with my biological mother.
It's so cool, and it's a credit to you. I love it when a composer can paint pictures with their music so clearly. And I love playing this game. I love listening to somebody's music and trying to see what they're depicting. And you do such a magnificent job of that. All right, I'd like to hear one more track from the same show, You Mean the Apocalypse. And this is a contrasting track. This one is called Scotty Shot. Okay, so this sounds a bit more like the last word of this title. This is much more aggressive and apocalyptic. You've got these pulsing rhythms, electronic wails, forceful percussion, and then we've got this eerie echo of a chord fading away. So tell us, what's happening in this seemingly violent scene?
What was interesting about this particular show was that, and I am not sure if this is a UK thing or if it was particular to this particular show, but in the US for TV shows, you usually have a showrunner who acts, he's the director of everything creative, and he sort of pulls everything together into a certain vision, and that includes the music. And what happened with Yumi in the Apocalypse was that we had different directors acting as a showrunner.
Huh.
And they would be guiding us as to the sound of the music that they wanted. So we had, there was a point in episode, I think 5, 6, and 7, where we had to do a 180 shift in the music and the sounds and the themes that were established from the beginning, and go a lot more electronic and a lot more aggressive. And it was hard at first, but then it just fit into the show because everything's going to hell in a handbasket because the world is going, is ending.
Yeah.
So that ended up working really well. So in episode 9, which is where this track is from, it's the last ditch effort to get into a bunker and to survive, trying at the same time to send a missile into this meteor that's coming to Earth to destroy it. So the idea is to send this rocket, blow up the meteor, and it ends up maybe it works. Don't
tell us. I want to see the show. It sounds like so much fun.
Yes, it's great. So I don't know if it works. To this day, I honestly don't know if it works or not. So anyways, one of the key people in this whole operation gets shot as he's trying to escape jail. He was wrongly put in jail. So that's where that track came from, and how it came to be, where it's just so much different than the first one that we heard.
Interesting. So how did you get this job scoring the music for You, Me, and the Apocalypse?
Well, you spoke about relationships earlier, and this was one of those where, because I've known Steve for such a long time, I hadn't worked with him for a while, but he called me and he said, look, I was offered this TV show and it's really fun and it's really great. Will you do it with me? And, how do you say no to that? So we started working on it together, and, 10 episodes later, here we are.
Wow. How cool. So I want to shift gears a bit. a pun intended, shift gears. You've written for some seminal video games such as The Sims 3 and Gears of War 2 and 3. Let's listen to one of your tracks for Gears of War 3, Dies Illa, which, as I believe you were explaining to me before we started the interview, means Days of Wrath. Now, I haven't played Gears of War, even though I do admire and really like video games. I like watching them. I'm not very good at playing them, but there seems to be something epic in nature, given your operatic, symphonic treatment of the score. Something tragic on a grand scale. And then we hear this dark militaristic march that grows in intensity towards the end with a touch of sinister technology sneaking in the orchestral procession. Would you mind telling us about the emotions you were trying to capture as you were scoring for this game?
Well, you again, you kind of hit the nail on the head on this one. What was that? So this was also when I was working. So Steve called me to work on this game. He had done Gears of War 2, which I worked with him on, and then he called me for Gears of War 3 again. And this is a scene where I'm not giving away any spoilers because if you haven't played it, that's sorry for the spoiler here. But there's a point where the main character finds out that his father is actually alive. He thought he was dead for a very long time. And this is the scene where he finally finds him, and he ends up being killed by one of the really bad guys in the series. And so this it was inspired by Mozart's Requiem, by a piece called I think it's also called Dies Irae, and so the translation of that is Day of Wrath and Doom Impending is what that Dies Irae, Dies Illa is the text of the actual Requiem that you hear. So it starts out as a very I'm trying to find the word here. Very, very sad, very melancholy. Oh, I found my dad finally. I didn't know you were alive, and I'm so happy. And then he ends up dying, and that's where you hear this massive shift. Of course, there's a big speech, by the father, and then he ends up sort of disintegrating into dust, done by this really bad guy, and that's where you start hearing the militaristic thing, where the main character is really mad and he's gonna get revenge and avenge his father. And
Yeah. Do you use the actual Dies Irae theme, which was a very historic theme dating all the way back to the Gregorian chant era that many composers have implemented in countless scores throughout history? Do you actually sneak that theme into your version?
I did not. I used a similar structure that the way that Mozart wrote that piece, which is also, so it was a combination of Mozart's piece and the Requiem combined with Adagio for Strings by Barber. Yeah, so that was a combination of those things. I later changed the title myself to Dies Illa. I don't know if that was officially what they used, but it just seemed very appropriate.
Really fantastic. So I understand that you've got some really amazing projects lined up. You're writing the music for this fascinating animated film called In Saturn's Rings. Now, this is a movie, or I'm not even quite sure how you call this, an animated film, but apparently there was this guy, a do-it-yourself basement filmmaker, who took photographs from the Cassini-Huygens spacecraft flyby of Saturn 10 years ago. And just using those photographs, he created animations of the spacecraft's flyby. No computer graphic images, no computer modeling. These are actual photographs that are animated. That is so cool.
It is pretty amazing. So he grabbed all these actual photographs from NASA, and he created somehow, this is all magic to me, movement and as if you were in a spaceship flying through Saturn and its rings. And he's still working on this. I mean, this is a very, very long-term project because there's a lot of cleaning up that needs to be done by these pictures. And so it's essentially a sequence of pictures taken by these satellites, and he's put them all into a seamless film, which I actually don't even know how I came upon it. I found it either on Facebook or Twitter or something. And so I went in there and I saw what he was doing. And as a sort of a space geek myself, I wrote to him and I said, look, I got to write some music for you. Let me write some music for you. So I grabbed he had done he put up a video on YouTube that was sort of an intro of like, okay, this is what this film is about. And it was about 2.5 minutes long. And so I said, okay, I'm just going to write some music to it and send it to him and see what he says. And so he agreed to me then, scoring about the first 10 minutes of the film, which starts out with sort of the creation of the universe, at least what we believe now is the way that the universe was created with a Big Bang and all that. And part of that is also this being kind of crowdsourced with different players and different all over the world, really. So what we did is we grabbed this piece of music. We had somebody translate it onto paper, and we put it out into the world for people to play along with it. So kind of in a very, very geeky way, Carl Sagan famously said, and we're all made of star stuff. And what's kind of cool about this particular piece of music is, we're all sort of made from the same thing. So all of it's kind of coming together because of the music. Doesn't matter where you are, what language you speak. We all speak music, and it's the result is this piece, which is going to be in the first 10 minutes of the film.
And so this is still a work in progress.
It is. We're working on it. So I wrote the initial quote unquote skeleton of it, kind of. It's done to a point, and we knew that we wanted people to play on it, and so we're getting other people to kind of have put in their flair and their and so now we have the task of assembling all of this and putting it together into a nice, beautiful package.
This is incredible. What were we talking about at the beginning of the interview about this creative, initiative that you seem to be having throughout your life? That's amazing.
It's great. It's great to when you're working with people, and it's composing is such a lonely sport. You're in a room and it's just you and your computer. There is a romantic notion that we are sitting at a piano with pencil and paper. That hardly happens. But having this window into the world and access to a bunch of people who want to be a part of it is really terrific.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're also setting the score for a major motion picture What About Love, starring Sharon Stone and Andy Garcia, which is set to be released in 2017. Tell us how you got that project and how that's coming along.
Again, circling back to the connections and the knowing people, this came about interestingly through a friend who's also a composer, Kim Plannert. He's from Germany, very talented composer. I met him through our common music editor, and I met this music editor when I was working for Steve on Desperate Housewives. And he recommended, so he was working he got called because he is friends with Ralph, who is the bass player for the Scorpions.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Because this is a German / Spanish co-production, there were certain rules in place as far as the financing and the staff that they could have on this film, and the composer needed to be Spanish, so it couldn't be German. So sadly, my friend Kim was out. He wasn't able to participate, but he said, "Look, I know Pieter. You should call Pieter." And I don't know all the rules, but because I am a Dutch citizen, I was able to get in there as a composer. And they had gone through several people, and somehow the director wasn't really satisfied, and so I sent him my demo. We met, and I scored a couple of things for him, and so I started working with Ralph and with Klaus Menzel, the director, and we ended up working on this film.
How fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing the intricate details of that. That's amazing. Well, I have one final question for you, Pieter. What would be your dream job or project in the future?
That's I don't know if I have an answer for that at the moment. I think anytime I can create music and work with people, and if those people are musicians that are helping with the score, or help working with a director or a producer. Another thing that I'm working on right now, which is very much in its early stages, is I'm working on a stage musical with a friend of mine who's a writer, which is completely out of my tool shed in a way. But I've always been a fan of musicals. I grew up with musicals, so I was always exposed to them. I never really went in there and tried to write one. So this has been really, really terrific for me so far, working with this writer. And so anytime that I can collaborate on something that's a long-term thing, that what's my dream job? I don't know. I will tell you when I find it, and I think it's going to be changing as I move from job to job.
It actually sounds like you're living your dream job already.
I think you might be right about that. Yes.
Pieter, thank you so much for taking the time to share these amazing insights into your fascinating life.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
For links to Pieter's website and resources mentioned in this episode, visit the show notes at amusicallife.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter to get the latest updates on future episodes. You can also subscribe to A Musical Life through iTunes or with your favorite podcast playing app, and get new episodes automatically downloaded onto your smartphone, tablet, or computer. If you enjoy these stories about making music and the things that move our souls, please support this podcast by telling a friend and posting a short review on iTunes at amusicallife.com/review. Thank you. Until next time, I'm Hugh Sung, and I wish you a musical life.